everybody, and welcome to this Industry Leaders Roundtable on Manufacturing Skills, hosted by IBSA Group. I'm Graham Russell. As Nick said, I'm Chair of the IBSA Group Board. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of country across Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past, present, emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders with us today. Welcome to our Industry Leaders panel. Innes Willicks, Jennifer Westacott, Ross Lambie and Scott Connolly, and thanks for your valuable time today. A warm welcome also to diverse range of manufacturing stakeholders and members of the Manufacturing Industry Reference Committees who are charged with developing and maintaining training standards for our vitally important manufacturing sector. Our audience today includes employers, TAFE directors, CEOs of industry associations, representatives of manufacturing unions, and government officials with a keen interest in the manufacturing sector. Clearly before us, we have a great opportunity to facilitate a renaissance in Australian manufacturing. Trade disruptions have companies working to onshore more of their supply chains. The closure of borders has halted skilled migration, perhaps for years, and governments are committing substantial funding to reskill our workforce. So it seems to me now is the time for all of us invested in skills training in Australia to be bold and determined, to propose, and I think more importantly, get stuck into implementing practical solutions that will deliver relevant dynamic training programs that meet the skills needs of current and emerging industries, but also attract school leavers and current workers because they are offered real skills-based career opportunities. I'll now leave you in the capable hands of Sharon Robertson, CEO of IBSA Group, who has extensive experience working across government, industry and the vet sector, and facilitated these conversations throughout the IBSA webinar series. Sharon is our MC for today. Over to you.
Thank you, Graham, and may I add my welcome to everyone participating in this event. Delighted that we've got such a distinguished panel of senior industry leaders with us today. I'm sure you're all aware of the importance and the significant contribution they make to our system and sectors, but just as a bit of an intro, we have Innes Willicks, the Chief Executive of AI Group, Jennifer Westacott, Chief Executive of Brisbane Business Council of Australia, Dr. Ross Lambie, Chief Economist and Director of Economics and Industry Policy at the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and finally, Scott Connolly, the Assistant Secretary at ACTU. Also want to make a quick little, I suppose, infomercial or a welcome to Nick Patel, who IBSA has been pleased to work with in recent times, given his role with the Modern Manufacturing Task Force with the Department of Industry. So thanks, Nick. Following on from Graham's opening comments, this event certainly provides us with an excellent opportunity to get key industry leaders in the same room, albeit virtually, to discuss how we can work together to ensure that the recovery and growth of our critically important manufacturing sectors are supported by a workforce with the skills required to confront the future. In terms of the format for the event today, I'll start with a brief overview of what we've been up to, and then invite Ian Curry, who is the chair of the Manufacturing and Engineering Reference Committee, to outline the insights from the conversations that have been facilitated over the past few months. We certainly look forward to hearing from our panel members, and if time permits, we're hoping to have a Q&A session with the audience here today, and hope to be on track to have the whole event finalised by 11:30 Eastern Standard Time this morning. So just to set the scene and what we've been doing to lead us to this event today, we're certainly conscious that as Australia emerges from the worst of the effects of COVID-19, we can start to focus our attention on recovery and capitalising on emerging opportunities. In 2020, the IBSA Group conducted an extensive series of conversations around delivering modern manufacturing through a skilled workforce. An initial event was conducted by the Honourable Michaela Cash, Minister for Employment, Skills, Small and Family Business, which was followed by a series of 6 webinars, 35 industry leaders presented at the webinars, more than 460 individuals participated, and over 4,000 were kept informed of the initiatives through social media. These conversations centred around a response to the government's recent modern manufacturing strategy and how to ensure that the skills required are made available to Australian industry and its workforce. Collective insights from this webinar series were collated into the Emerging Findings report, which has been circulated for the Industry Leaders Roundtable today. The outcomes from this important conversation we have today will further contribute to a final report on the key issues and potential solutions for delivering a vibrant modern manufacturing industry through a skilled workforce. Now, on behalf of our 6 industry reference committees, I invite Ian Curry to share with us the emerging findings from these discussions. Ian, over to you.
Thanks, Sharon. The webinar series that IBSA Manufacturing hosted recently have made an important contribution to the discussion about rebuilding Australian sovereign manufacturing capability that we needed to have. It's clear that whatever else we may add to the mix, skills will need to be front and centre. Whilst it's impossible for me to do justice to the richness and diversity of views that we heard from those that participated in the webinars, we've attempted to distill some of what we've heard into 4 key findings. Firstly, the manufacturing sector is well positioned and is committed to building sovereign capability, not only across the government's 6 priority areas, but in manufacturing more generally and in the supply chains that are so critical to getting this right. Building sovereign capability in manufacturing will require substantial skills and workforce development effort to address both shortages of skilled workers and to improve the quality and relevance of the training we provide so that it properly aligns with industry standards. The success of any manufacturing strategy will be dependent on how well we can integrate people, skills, technologies, production systems, materials, innovation in a connected 4th industrial revolution. Lastly, industry leadership, partnerships and collaboration, including with the training system, will be essential if we are to succeed. Central to the key findings from these discussions was the call for a renewed focus on ensuring strong industry leadership in both standards and priority setting. A focus on ensuring that both training products and training delivery need to reflect the skills and knowledge required to perform effectively in the workplace in order to rebuild certainty and confidence that our workforce development arrangements are robust, contemporary and credible. While the government's focus on manufacturing being a priority and a critical component of future success is welcome, it's essential that we work together to ensure that we drive the recovery and economic and social renewal that our nation needs. High quality, consistent skills outcomes based on standards defined by industry are vital. Our ability to work together to meet our skills needs will also be vital. Thanks, Sharon. I'm looking forward to the rest of the program with some enthusiasm. It should be a great panel.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you for sharing the key findings. They provide us a really great lead into hearing from our panelists. With a combined experience around the table, this is a perfect opportunity for our senior leaders to provide their perspectives. To start, I would like to ask each member of our panel today to provide a short overview on the work their organisations are undertaking on strategies for advancing the manufacturing industry. Ines, perhaps I might ask you to take the first go at that. Welcome, and love to hear what you're up to.
Thanks, Sharon. Thanks, Graham and Ian and Nick as well for organising today. It's a very important conversation, and one as we slowly emerge from COVID is even more important. I'd like to also welcome and acknowledge the other panellists today, Jennifer, Ross and Scott. Thanks for joining us, and hopefully we can get a lot out of today and give some direction on what is an essential debate to Australia's economic future. I just want to make a couple of points. open up, and then obviously, hopefully, we'll be able to get in some questions and some discussion later. But it's very timely that we be talking today. Just yesterday, Judith Sloan in The Australian wrote another sort of obituary for manufacturing in Australia. There was a lot of good stuff and worthy stuff in what Judith wrote, but it was another, at this time, another attempt to say that manufacturing was gone and that it was of very little value to Australia's economic future. I think COVID has proved exactly the opposite, and that's a strong view that we have held, that manufacturing has held up well through COVID. It has been the bedrock of our economic strength and has provided a great platform for our economy to rebound. It was the manufacturing sector, most of all, that kept working through the worst of the downturn. But the upturn we're now seeing provides another opportunity and another rethink around how to build on the capability that we already have, but how to develop the core strengths and competencies that we do need to make and ensure that manufacturing remains a crucial part of our economy. It already employs just under 1 million people directly, and there are millions of jobs which spin off out of manufacturing. But manufacturing is changing, industry is changing, and we as a country need to keep up. And a core part of that challenge for us is in the education, training and skills sector. If we don't have the education system, the training and the skills that we do need, then we will not build the scale that we are looking to build through the modern manufacturing strategy that's been unveiled by the federal government. And we won't see us be able to take up the opportunities that are presented to us as our economy, both domestically and internationally, pivots. Education training is key to this, as I mentioned. It's been a system and a relationship which has been strained between industry and education and training for some time. Concerns from industry that they're not getting what they want out of the education system. People with the requisite skills, both what you might call hard and soft, not coming through. And this has sort of held back industry, but it's also held back our young people as they seek to find their way through into the workforce. We don't think there's a silver bullet in sort of addressing the issues that both sides of the equation have, but we do have some thoughts around what could be done to improve the relationship and, most importantly, to further improve the outcomes that we're all after, no matter where you sit in this discussion, for the benefit of everyone. We see 5 key interrelated elements, and I'll just sort of briefly touch on, Sharon, and then we can go from there. One is that at the forefront has to be the development of digital skills intermingled with what you might call the development of human capabilities, the soft skills. That's what business and industry is telling us more and more that they need as they emerge further from COVID and they look towards the future. So we need digital capability and human interaction skills, essentially. Digital capability is crucial, and we strongly argue that the word digital should be taken out of conversations around the economy. So it's not a conversation around the digital economy, it's just a conversation around the economy of the future, because that economy of the future will indeed be a digital one. No other way to think about it. Secondly, we need to put the apprenticeship system back as being a bedrock of our education training system. It's crucial that we get our apprenticeship system working both for apprentices and for business. And we need to do that as a priority. We've seen a dramatic slippage up until recently in the number of apprentices working through the system, and that is our workforce of the future. And we require all sides to get the apprenticeship system working for both. We need to make work-based learning a core principle and outcome of our education and training system, to get as many young people into work as early as possible, to experience what a workplace looks like, to understand how work is done, to understand notions around teamwork, around project delivery. All of those sort of issues are crucial. To have our young people as part of their education and training, their degrees, their apprenticeships, all their TAFE work, to spend as much time as possible in a work environment is crucial. And to do that, we need to build partnerships. We also look at needing to build flexible qualifications into the future that incorporate shorter form training whenever it's needed by companies. Shorter form flexible qualifications are very much the way of the future. It's what industry is calling out for, quite specific, targeted educational outcomes that suit the needs and the purposes of industry. That's a very clear direction that we're going to need to go down. And finally, we need to quickly establish a new template for partnerships between manufacturing companies and education and training providers. It's often been said, but it is true, that there are sometimes companies and educators pass like ships in the night. They don't have the conversations that they should. They don't have the relationships that they should have. They don't have the entry points to each other they should have, so that they can build relationships and partnerships. So we need, as a priority, to get a new template for partnerships between business and education established as quickly as possible. The final point I'll make, in the interest of time, is that this is just not about big business or business of scale. This is also significantly about developing relationships with SMEs. I think, as you all know, 90% of our manufacturing firms employ 20 people or less. So there has to be, and so there's a big focus in the modern manufacturing strategy around building scale, which is absolutely crucial. But to build scale, we need to build the relationships, and we cannot forget our manufacturing SMEs when we are having this discussion. They're a key component of the discussion here, and it's something that we need to keep in mind. I think we've got, 3 other panelists and then some time for conversation, but I just wanted to put those out there as sort of thought starters, but key elements of strategies that we at AI Group are following and pursuing through our work with a whole range of agencies, including IBSA, to try to sort of reframe and repackage education and training for the manufacturing space. This is a time of huge opportunity. We had that other obituary yesterday, but manufacturing has come through this very strongly and is emerging very strongly. We're seeing that through the data that we collect all the time, and we put out our monthly PMI. We are seeing a strong resurgence in manufacturing. Now we just need to upskill and develop capability and scale to ensure that momentum continues, and education and training is a key funnel for that. I think I'll leave it there, Sharon, but I'll throw it open to others. Thank you.
Ines, that was great. I just don't think you could have more comprehensively covered off so many things. And I think you've brilliantly set the scene for today. Great thought starters. But I saw Ross nodding a lot, so I might go to Ross next. Ross, welcome. Your thoughts and where's Aki at with, I suppose, manufacturing and skills needs?
Thanks, Sharon. And yeah, look, I too thought Ines covered it brilliantly. Look, in terms of our particular focus, just a few things here. The first one is, how do we collaborate and commercialise better in terms of getting innovation through to where it's going to best be used by involving not only the government, but also the private sector and the research sectors, so that they are focused on these outcomes. So we're doing a wee bit of work there in terms of ideas for bringing about the collaboration through to commercialisation, which is going to be fundamental to making significant advances in the area of manufacturing. We're also looking at another key element here, which is reducing regulatory burden, and really look so that we get to a regulation system that is outcomes focused, so that we do support those SMEs that want to get into manufacturing or want to expand their manufacturing activity. We don't need barriers. What we need is people to be able to seek out and take up the opportunities that are going to be presented to them. The obvious other one is looking at our ability to provide competitive pricing on energy. So once again, how do we get government, regulation and markets to work better to achieve those outcomes? Because energy is at the heart of this. And picking up on Innes's point, and I think it's a really good one about, let's stop talking about digital economy. Let's talk about economy and just accept the fact it's going to be digital. Well, getting to that point is energy intensive. So this is where advanced economies are going anyway. We've really got to look at providing competitive energy to drive the growth in those areas of the economy that are going to be subject more to the use of energy, and particularly electricity, as we look to have greater electrification across the economy as we respond to climate change. Education, skills and training. Look, I'm not going to repeat what Innes has already said, but what I'm going to say is we really need to understand that the skills and training in the education system has to be better focused on the needs that the economy requires. So how do we provide that training? How do we provide that skills uplift where there's going to be genuine demand, but also an absolute need? And that's going to improve both the outcomes of business, but also the outcomes of those people seeking jobs. And with respect to that more specifically, how do we make better use of things like apprenticeships, whereby there's different forms, there's different opportunities available for people to get the training and the skills uplift they need, that is going to not only get them in terms of the formal qualification, but the job ready qualification. And also accessibility to things like diplomas and advanced diplomas, because one thing that's going to become really clear over the next few years is that we're talking about potentially a very dynamic environment. The skills that are needed aren't sort of going to be set in place. They're going to be emerging, they're going to be changing. So we've got to have a system that really caters for that flexibility, caters for that constant need to be upskilled in a way that is not going to actually be a burden to the system, but deliver those skills where they're needed, when they're needed. I think in terms of the other sort of areas, I mentioned about the digital side, which is really important. The other one is materials efficiency. It's going to be another theme that's going to flow right through the advanced manufacturing side, but I'd say the economy far more broadly. We're seeing circular economy becoming more prominent in thinking, particularly coming out of the Northern Hemisphere. OECD's doing a lot of work on it. Materials efficiency. How can we get more out of the materials we're using so that we're reducing not only the waste, but we're reducing the environmental impacts? And that opens up a whole set of skills that are going to be required. And that flows right through the supply chain. So it's not just demand for this stuff, it's how we actually produce it and produce what's going to be acceptable. So look, we're looking at this in terms of the advanced manufacturing side of things as touching on a full suite of policy areas. And I think that just really highlights that it's going to be fundamental to driving our recovery, but more than that, it's going to be fundamental to driving our future prosperity. So it's pretty important.
Ross, well said. And picking up on those additional points that you raised around the dynamic environment that we're operating in, I think that's more dynamic than it ever has been. But that material sufficiency certainly came up in a lot of the discussions we had, and I'm sure we'll get the chance to talk a bit more about that, I hope, this morning. I might move now to Scott. Welcome, Scott. Love to hear your perspective, or that, I suppose more importantly, ACTU's perspective on where things are at from your side of things.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Sharon and everyone, and Ines and Ross for those comments. There's not much that we take issue with or disagree with. I think, yeah, very much so. All of that is an agenda that we would be very eager to sign up for, with some work on the detail. But I think that's really a key issue here, and I think we very much welcome the conversation. We've been particularly engaged with the employers at this table over the course of the past year or so, and I think that's really striking in itself in terms of the level of cooperation and collaboration amongst these peaks to address what is a critical issue, and a one that's emerging in its importance for us to stop talking about it and really find solutions and see them actioned. I think sort of our reflections are, very much that the pandemic, of course, as Ines has made the point, made the importance of our manufacturing sector, again, just so important in terms of its highlighting, the critical issues that we have in terms of our supply chain and the potential vulnerabilities, as well as the opportunities. But, for a starker illustration, you probably couldn't look past the fact that, we have weekly supplies of the vaccine being delivered, despite the fact that we're developing, millions of versions here ourselves. But that's the reality of our supply chain today, and will be for some months. But I think for all of us at this table, that wasn't new. We were well aware of the issues that we've had in manufacturing, and concerned about the trajectory that we were on, and our capacity to produce. The investment being required to be put in building not just infrastructure, but all capital, but really the critical skills infrastructure. The points that Ines has made, and Ross as well, about what are we doing about building our human capacity and our skills capacity going forward. So while we sort of think that the pandemic has made all those points clear to many others, for us it's sort of just an opportunity, I think, to sort of remake the case of why we need to get on with the job of reinvesting in this sector and reshaping it with enormous opportunity that's ahead of us. And I think it is really exciting in the moment of time that we're in for manufacturing, and to ensure that it becomes, as it has been historically, a key part of our nation's future. And look, from our perspective, while we play a role as the representatives of Labor in a practical sense in the process, and very much attuned to what this means for workers, but similarly, very keen to be part of the conversation, because, like all at this table, they're fundamentally beneficiaries of this system if we can get it right. And it's critical that we do get it right. And in terms of that, I think for us, it's really about the government reinvesting in manufacturing. The points about addressing vocational education and training have been critical to upskill and provide skilled workers to market. I think ensuring that the voices of industry, the voices of this table, are heard in a structured way, and that they're the primary voices in setting the directions is critical to what's ahead of us. And I think, for us, a key outcome of today's conversation would be, working from today, perhaps to formalise that process in terms of a structured collaboration with government, to ensure that we're heard collaboratively as one on the issues that we can agree in this space, because I think there's many that we can agree in that need to be prioritised. Look, practically for us, of course, there's the day-to-day work that we continue to do in manufacturing and in this space. So many of our affiliates have been continuing to advocate campaigns like the Keep Apprentices on the Tools campaign that our metalworkers, our union, has run, about occupational standards in the sector. We continue to collaborate with many employers about the skills parts of the system, ensuring that not only are we defending current skill sets, but reinvesting in them going forward. We've been doing some work with some key thought leaders like Jim Stanford and the Australia Institute about some key reports to try and push the conversation along and push the boundaries of what might be able to be achieved here in terms of the work we did on a fair share for Australian manufacturing and the Australia Institute's report into the advanced skills for advanced manufacturing as potential pathways forward. And practically the ACTU itself made a number of calls in the middle of last year about manufacturing being a key part of our recovery, calling for a number of initiatives in a sustainable manufacturing plan that we issued, which included initiatives like zero interest loans to finance reinvestment in renewable energy. Absolutely agree with the point Ross has made about the critical, how critical energy will be to getting this right. An initiative of accelerated depreciation bonuses to assist reinvestment, technology grants for commercialised research in new technologies. We proposed the creation of 5 sustainable manufacturing clusters to be the bedrocks of growth and shaping how we might reshape not just the industry and the sectors, but our regions and our economies. And of course, a proposal that we create a superpower investment fund to link both capital and manufacturers to the future. So there are just some practical things we've done as well, and we very much look forward to the conversation today.
Thank you, Scott. That was really good. And particularly, I'm certainly hearing from all of you, as we heard from the audiences up until today, is that need to think differently around our cooperation and collaboration as a group. And today is almost evidence of us coming together to try and actually work through the solutions going forward. Now, lastly, but probably very, very importantly, Jennifer Westacott, it's great to have you here. Love to hear BCA's perspective.
Well, thanks everyone. Thanks to my colleagues for a terrific scene setting. Big focus for us at the Business Council. I think the first thing to say is that, and it picks up Ines' point, there is a tremendous manufacturing base in Australia. So I chair the Western Parkland Authority, which has got the new Aerotropolis in it. As part of the building of Nancy B. Walton Airport. And what has just been reinforced to me is just the huge manufacturing base that exists in places like Western Sydney. I think the second point to make is that we've got to, we're talking about advanced manufacturing, and that's really about the how, not the what. And we've shifted away from that traditional manufacturing base. And I would argue, just as a starting point for the conversation, that everything now is advanced manufacturing. And I think the conversation about advanced manufacturing and everything else is now particularly unhelpful. And that kind of focus on that value-added expertise, skills, knowledge, production, with, as to Ines' point, digital integrated into the production and value chain, if we start to think about it like that, there are huge opportunities for Australia. But if we continue to sort of think about it in the kind of looking backwards, then we will have the wrong conversations about how we get this going. The second point to make is the point Ross is making. I won't dwell on that. If you don't get the macroeconomic settings right that drive investment, that drive productivity, everything you do, frankly, after that is pretty pointless. If I go to the skills agenda, and I know we're going to get into VET a little bit later, what we're arguing for is that you've got to have a user-centric skills and education system. And by user, I mean employer and industry, and obviously the learners themselves, which has got to be about flexibility, it's got to be about targeted training options, and it's got to be about tailored training options. And it's got to support upskilling across a lifetime. We're currently just something people might be interested in, doing some very serious work with the Nous group about how do you mobilise that user-centric micro-credentialing framework so that you can actually get a system versus kind of the odd scattergun approach to micro-credentialing. And of course, we haven't talked about the secondary education system, and hopefully we can pick that up in the discussion. But if you're continuing to produce year 11 and 12 students who don't have those fundamental STEM capabilities, then trying to get people into the graduate programs is going to be even difficult. I want to talk about skill migration very briefly. You've got to keep doing this. It's got to be targeted. I reject the notion that migration kills jobs. It creates them if it's properly organised. And what the big companies tell me is that they want to see the skills density, the ecosystem, to use the jargon. They want to see a set of skills and capabilities, some of which they need to bring in from international experience, they which also bring the innovation, they bring the technology with them, and that creates a new and more dynamic skills system here in Australia, right? That skills ecosystem. So, you know, we believe that you've got to get migration back up to its previous levels, and you've got to make that obviously still focused on that skill density. Finally, we think that you've got to have a research and commercialisation system that allows us to translate ideas at scale, whether that's the role of precincts, whether that's the role of targeted translation funds. We can talk about that, but you know, Australia has got to kind of really step up there. And you saw some very big initiatives in the last budget. And we have a very serious piece of work looking at how do you get that commercialisation at scale. And to Ines' point, which is an important one, and I'll finish on this, this is about partnerships. It is about, you've got to have large corporations in that model. You've got to have large corporations working with SMEs. It's large corporations that help SMEs take their innovation into a global market. And so we've got to start thinking about, you know, all of the partners that need to be at that table. And we've got to have a set of skills arrangements, a set of institutional arrangements, and a set of research and commercialisation arrangements that drive collaboration, which drives commercialisation, which drives industry formation, which drives job creation at scale. And that's the challenge that I think we've got to overcome. I'll stop there and look forward to the discussion.
Excellent, Jennifer. Thank you so much. Certainly appreciate your insights on the challenges facing the future of Australia's manufacturing industry and the role of the skills ecosystem in addressing these. So thank you. Just before we go into some of the questions, I'd like to invite Nick Patel from the Department of Industry to give us an update on the progress on the modern manufacturing strategy. Nick, welcome and thanks for coming along today.
So listen, thanks very much, everybody. Amazing presentations today. I've been taking copious notes, of course, and I don't want to sidetrack this amazing discussion on skills, the skills needed for manufacturing, too much on what I'm working on, which is the modern manufacturing strategy that the government announced in the last budget. But as Sharon mentioned, it's probably worth giving you, those of you who don't know already, a brief sense of that, and then I'll go straight into the insights that we've got from our work over the last few months on skills, which are, of course, are completely consistent with what we've already heard and what I'm very interested to hear the other views from the floor coming up. So the modern manufacturing strategy was announced in the budget, the October budget. The headline material is all on our website, and for those of you who haven't, I do recommend taking a look. There's good stuff there. The things probably to focus on for this discussion, first of all, to be clear, I'm from the Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources, not the Department of Skills and Training, although we work very closely together. And we worked particularly closely over the last few months with IBSA, and I'm really grateful to Sharon and Phil and others for enabling that engagement, because of course one of the key bits of feedback we've had from industry is a bit like what Jennifer said a moment ago. Macroeconomic settings are crucial, and there are things you can do with a grants program, but there are things you can't. And skills is one of those issues that need to be resolved, or else you're not going to go anywhere. The other things I'd just highlight about the manufacturing, and it comes back really to what Ines was pointing to the first up about the article yesterday. We are sort of targeted. People sometimes read manufacturing strategy, they assume it's all about chemicals and heavy industry. If you read the strategy, we certainly don't exclude that. We're certainly not saying that's not important to Australia, because it is. But the focus of the strategy is on 6 identified national manufacturing priorities, which I can rattle off if you need to. But and it's also very focused on the value add and the smile curve. The smile curve's right at the front of our strategy, and that, of course, leads to really interesting questions about job numbers. Like, are we seeing a decline in jobs in manufacturing? I mean, that's what the ABS tells us, but are they measuring the right jobs? And we're doing some work. My chief economist there is doing some work with the ABS on that now. And as you probably all know, it's tough to measure that stuff right. But I think if we can't kind of get that baseline sorted and that data gathering sorted, then we're potentially going to be measuring the wrong things. So that's one thing. The other kind of the buzzwords for our strategy are scale and competitiveness, words that some of you have used already this morning. The third one is resilience, which of course is extremely important right now. But the bit of the program that I'm focused on is resilience is important, but really this is about supporting competitive Australian industries to scale up. There is a huge grants element to this, $1.3 billion in the funding that I work on out of a total of 1.5 billion. But we are also focused on the macroeconomic conditions. If you look at the strategy, it's the first pillar. So just quickly to finish up on that, our large grants programs have just started to open. Last Friday, we opened up the Modern Manufacturing Initiative, 2 of the streams, translation and integration. Initially, it's for space, the space priority area, and the roadmap for space was launched at the same time. But I'm happy to tell all of you that over the next few weeks, starting this week, continuing for the next sort of 5-ish weeks, there'll be each one of the national manufacturing priorities will be opened up to funding, and the roadmap will come out. So say by mid-March or so, it'll all be open. There is another element of the strategy, which is, as Jennifer mentioned, sort of precinct level investments, the collaboration stream we called, and that'll open up in the second quarter. And there's obviously a bit of work to be done on that, including with people around this table. So just to finish up then, through the course of designing these roadmaps or helping industry, working with industry to design these roadmaps, lots of themes came up, and one of them was skills. I could almost say it was number one across the 6 areas. Each of the 6 areas gave us slightly different feedback, I think similar to what Sharon and Phil have found. But I would note just as a headline that the emphasis on vocational was very, very high. Not to dismiss the importance of the university sector, but I think there's probably an argument that Australia's doing pretty well there. The challenges around commercialisation of ideas are very real and something we all need to work on. But in terms of skills, it's pretty good. Even in something like medical products, where there's a need for people with advanced degrees, the feedback we got is the gap is people with genuine lab experience, with those effectively high-end manufacturing experience, who have a master's, maybe not a PhD, but actually know how a lab works. That's the gap. And industry and government need to work together on those things. From our emerging sectors like space, lots of talk about how the sort of traditional system is not really delivering what they need, an acknowledgement that a lot of those skills will be developed on the job, but a real desire to work with other partners, universities, TAFEs and others to really deliver what's needed. And then from the more traditional sectors, established sectors like food and beverage, there was some more sort of nuts and bolts issues around people who've been in the job for too long and need to be reskilled within the sector just to maintain motivation, etc. And the micro-credentialing point that Jennifer mentioned has come up several times as well. So look, that's probably enough from me. I'm happy to take questions, but here I'm mostly here to listen to those insights on skills. And we want to work together with all of you and with the Department of Education Skills to advance these things from an industry perspective.
And thank you, Nick. And I also want to acknowledge the collaboration that we've been having and appreciating with the Department of Industry and the work that they're doing in modern manufacturing strategy, and that great collaboration that we seem to have playing out now between skills and industry. And the MMS, or the modern manufacturing strategy, certainly has provided the platform for that. So that's a really good thing. Trying to keep on time. So I'd now like to explore some of the questions that have arisen from our various conversations that we've had over the past couple of months. Whilst I'll address these questions to individual panel members, I certainly invite others to add their thoughts, but we'll probably try and keep this to about a 20-minute conversation. So we'll pick the high-level comments that have come out and test some of the comments or thinking from our panel members. Ines, perhaps can I start with you? One of the questions that certainly would have seen from our emerging findings centres on that issue of sovereign capability and how can skills and training best contribute to improving that? Do you have some thoughts or comments on that?
Well, thanks, Sharon, and thanks to everyone for their contributions today. It's been a really really good discussion, very rich. And I think there's a lot of agreement. There's far more agreement than not. And I think that's really positive. It's now about the doing. Sovereign capability, the conversation around sovereign capability in Australia really picked up. It's always been there, but it really picked up momentum, I would argue, from about February last year, from about this time last year, as we started to see the change in our supply chains occur, with the virus impacting on China, and that sort of built up the conversation around sovereign capability. What do we need to do? What do we need to deliver? What are we missing out on? Should we make everything? The answer to that, we believe, is no. But these sort of questions came up, and where are our strengths and where are our weaknesses? How do we build on our strengths and how do we reduce our weaknesses? Sovereign capability is going to be, I think, as was sort of talked about in the conversation, an even larger discussion point as we go forward. And in part, that the modern manufacturing strategy is trying to address issues around sovereign capability in 6 key component areas of the economy. But how do we build up our strengths is the key question. And underlying that key outcome has got to be that skills are a part of that. Now, I think Nick was just saying, that the strategy, is about really developing our capability in a whole range of areas, as well as putting in and strengthening those bedrock industries, and that's really what we have to do. But to develop those, we need to develop the skills, and I go back to what I said before. We need to develop the partnerships to do that, and then go into other things like Jennifer really emphasised around micro-credentialing and the like. So we need to sort of change the conversations that we've been having in some ways around skills to look at, well, what do we need for going forward for the future? What will our economy look like? Where are the challenges and where are the opportunities? And it's important that we develop a skills base that works for us as a country to meet those needs. So without a skills base, we are not going to develop the sovereign capability that we need. It is a fundamental, and if you're going to build a pyramid, you put skills at the bottom. I mean, the question that always comes up, last point, is what comes first, skills or industry? I would argue you don't have industry if you don't have skills.
That's a really good segue. I can see Jennifer nodding a lot. Would you like to add, and I'm just thinking of your ecosystem comments, would you like to add anything further, Jennifer?
I think that's spot on. I think, if I think about the Aerotropolis, and when we talk to the big companies that are coming in, what they're interested in is this idea, and I'm trying to find a more simple way of expressing it, of a skill density, of an ecosystem of people who can support manufacturing and who can support what they want to do. And they need to understand that before you start talking about the cost of entry, for example. That's the first conversation you have. So I think Ines is spot on there, that it's of great interest. Can I get access to the skilled people that I need to then justify my investment and potential relocation or expansion in Australia? The skills bit has been, like, I reckon, the first conversation we had with almost everyone.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I think it's certainly taking us to that issue of skills, but I'm going to throw to Scott and move the conversation slightly to the supply of skilled workers. And I think you started talking about that before. And the question that I have for you is, given the time needed to develop skills at the trade and technician level, what are the key initiatives to ensure that that supply of skilled workers that both Ines and Jennifer have said are so vitally important to the manufacturing sector now and for the next 10 years?
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. So I think there's a couple of things sort of building on your discussion we've just had, and I think building is the right word. I think I just reflect on this really goes to what is our level of vision and what's our ambition for not just our workforce but our nation. And I think really, if you approach the question, with significant ambition, and sort of reflect on the fact that it's sort of 50 years since we landed on the moon 50 years ago. This week we saw vision of Mars and audio of Mars. That's if we've got ambition like that, and I certainly think we should have and could have in the context particularly of our place geographically in the globe, in our region as a functioning, stable, secure nation and democracy, we are uniquely and strategically placed to capitalise on our position. And bringing sort of back from that 10 years in that context is just not long enough. We need to be thinking beyond that. But of course, and that brings us to recognise that it just takes time to develop those skills. But if you've got, an ambitious agenda, a vision about where you want to be, then you can absolutely do things incrementally in the short term about taking the proactive steps that do make a difference, and those building blocks that Ines and Jennifer has mentioned as being critical and tangible and can be delivering material outcomes in practical terms. So what are some of those things that you should start on or could start on today? Look, in our mind, using the existing infrastructure we have, like rebuilding and reinvesting our TAFE system in terms of securing ongoing funding, as well as creating it as an infrastructure skills hub to ensure the delivery of skills to industry, let alone the dynamics of training courses and the points that have been made about ensuring that they're industry-led and industry relevant. Free TAFE, I think, is a narrative that we've been making the case for some time, but I think the time surely has come, and maybe there's a combination of that with the comments that have already been made about targeted industries, targeted qualifications, with some of those partnerships that have been previously mentioned in the conversation. The wage subsidy, I think, certainly has a lot of merit in terms of it being built on what's already been done and expanded, of course, to the point Ines has made earlier about apprenticeships as a foundational level of what we talk about in terms of skill development and skill building. And then practically, of course, ensuring that this is not just a program for a program's sake, but we're anchoring it in real outcomes for industry and, of course, workers, and that's leveraging what we can in terms of government spend and government procurement. I think is a critical part of what the solution needs to be here, in ensuring there's real tangible outcomes for both workers and industry in practical terms. So they're just some examples from us that I think can be quickly put to work, but then also challenge the framework that we've got to think bigger in this context, as opposed to just trying to, which I think is part of the issue that we have now. We're sort of in a mindset that we've got a problem, let's create a solution, as opposed to we're building for where we want to be.
No, very good point, Scott. Thank you. And just picking up on that macro perspective, I might throw to Ross. Did you have any other further comments, potentially on the macro side of things and the economic levers that we might need to pull?
Look, sort of a macro comment, but I'd really like to pick up on Jennifer's skills ecosystem, because I think that captures it brilliantly. But what sort of comes to mind during the course of this conversation is we have this sort of skills ecosystem, but we've also got to be aware there's a broader, what I call skills environment, because while we are looking at these specific areas, and this is very much applicable to sovereign capability, we're talking about broader skills here, because we're talking about skills that are needed to deliver the R&D, the design, the engineering, the sales, the services, as well as the IT. There's a whole broad range of general skills that have to be developed that complement and support those specific skills that are required to deliver the product.
Couldn't agree with you more, Ross. And I think many of you, I think we touched on it earlier, the skills needed to enable this, I suppose, advancing of modern manufacturing doesn't sit in VET alone, and it's not a specific qual. There's many, many skills that we need to develop, and some that we don't even have the training in place for at the moment. But more importantly, it traverses both VET and higher ed. As you rightly said, Ross, it's not defined by VET nor higher ed. Those skills sit across the both. And that certainly came up in the conversations. I might ask Jennifer, because it was certainly a pertinent issue that was raised. What are the steps do you think we can take to ensure that better alignment between higher ed and vet to address the skills and knowledge needs of the manufacturing industries? And your skills ecosystem, I think, might be the good platform there.
Yeah, well, I think the way to think about the skills ecosystem is, remember the old Suzanne ads? This goes with that. You know, that's how I think about the kind of skills ecosystem. So I think there's 4 points on vet. First of all, we need alignment between vet and higher ed. Secondly, we need better use of micro-credentialing to do upskilling and reskilling. Third, we have to have education and training that is workplace driven. And fourth is the resourcing of vets. So let me just quickly whip through these. On alignment, we've got to get these two systems working together. Better pathways for learners and for employers, better partnerships, leveraging the strengths of both sectors. Now, the crucial thing here is that learners have got to be able to transition more seamlessly between the two systems. And I think the first really fundamental question is you've got to kind of cast out 10 years. If we want to achieve a more dynamic skills system that's kind of user-centric, as I've described it, you've got to say to yourself, can that be done with a two-stream funding model that doesn't allow the learner and the employer to pull those funds together around like the idea we've had of a lifelong skills account so that people can purchase and between both of the sectors. So I know it's hard to do this in funding. I know there's a lot of opposition to it. I know there's a lot of anxiety to it, but I think it's a fundamental issue that if you don't do it, you have to say, well, a system that funds providers in two completely different streams, what is the opportunity for the user to integrate it? I think there's a big opportunity on alignment to bring vet and higher education together on research and innovation. Now, there'll be some people who don't agree with that, but the idea that vet doesn't have a role to play in research, I think is just snobbery, to be honest. And some of that is about co-location. So the Aerotropolis will have those things co-located. And so that's where I come to my precinct model, where you will be able, I think at scale, to get the two sectors working together, working with employers, working with large companies and working with SMEs to kind of drive that integration. On micro-credentials, we've got to be able to support that upskilling, but we've got to be able to allow a person to stack a set of credentials, and then we've got to be able to recognise those. So the absence of a skills passport, which Peter Shergold talked about in his secondary pathways review that I sat on the panel of, is a real obstacle to being able to do that, and that's the work we're doing with NOWS. The other thing we'd like to see goes to something Innes mentioned, is more advanced apprenticeships, which combine higher education and vocational education, which would be more at a kind of diploma or associate degree level, because you can't just have the top end skills here. You've got to actually be able to blend a set of skills. And of course, we believe we continue to need to push into the foundation skills areas, which are still quite weak in some sectors. And because you can't have a bifurcation of the labour market with good jobs and terrible jobs. You've got to have a capacity for people to be able to access and upskill. And of course, if people have got poor digital skills and poor literacy, there's a real inequity issue there. On workplace driven, I think, that speaks to itself. How do we actually start to drive, a serious kind of take up of work integrated learning, and how does that get to be part of the micro-credential model? So the new education model we've developed at the Aerotropolis will see micro-credentials at TAFE or VET, universities, and a workplace placement, all constituting a qualifications framework. On resourcing, just to finish up here, we have just got to turn around the decade-long decline in the resourcing of VET. And that's got to be done through a reinvigoration of the National Skills Agreement, funding based more on activity, supporting high quality training. But resourcing does need to flow to TAFEs. They've got to recover their capability. They've got to be able to up their own capability to deliver that full range of products And I would say that because of the kind of poor funding that's happened to TAFE for such a long period of time, that I think that's questionable, the extent to which TAFE is ready to take up this challenge. There would be different views about that, but I think, you know, the funding here has been poor, it's been eroded over a long period of time, and we've got to reinvest in the TAFE system to build its capabilities so that it can actually deliver on those higher expectations. And finally, TAFE has got to have more autonomy to be able to compete. You know, in many of the jurisdictions, TAFE is still in a full Nelson headlock or whatever they're called, of being able to respond to industry needs, and we've just got to be able to kind of free them up so they can compete. So there's just a few ideas on VET.
A lot of really good ideas, Jennifer. And I just saw Innes nodding a lot, because I think a lot of your comments aligned with his points at the opening. So I just wanted, did you want to add or elaborate on any of that at this point, Innes?
I just agree largely, I mean, almost entirely with everything Jennifer just said, but I just want to amplify the last or two of the points. One around micro-credentialing, just to re-emphasise for everyone, that is really where industry is going conceptually and in reality. That's not to say the days of long degrees or courses are over, but there's a lot more specialisation occurring within industry that industry needs. As our skills needs change, as technology advances, I think that's the key point here, that that is a fundamental direction that we're going to have to grapple with and go down into the future. And the last point I just want to sort of just quickly touch on is Jennifer's point around TAFE. It does need more funding, but the entire training system needs more funding and more emphasis within policy making. More generally, TAFE has got to be a core part of it, but we're hearing a lot from industry at the moment around some of their struggles with TAFE, lack of resourcing at TAFE. You know, you need the money and the investment in TAFE so it can also keep up with the skills and technology needs that industry are going to need. So it's going to need a huge investment. And that point around federal state, you know, funding and standoffs over training, hopefully, you know, we can navigate a way through that, and we have to do that to then put the money into the system that we need.
Thanks, Innes. And there might be one more wrap-up question I'm just thinking right now that we do need to cover off on. But before we do, I just want to go back to a point that Ross raised earlier in the conversation, because I don't want to lose sight of that, and that was around our circular economy, because that equally came up quite a lot in our discussions with industry more broadly. So if I can pitch a question at you, Ross, and others, please feel free to jump in. What are the implications for enterprises and industry from the growing community and training partners' calls for sustainability and circular economy initiatives?
The short answer to that is immense. I think this is an area, well, I don't think, this is an area that touches on every part of the economy. And it's, you know, it's not only for new areas that have been created in the economy, it's also for the traditional. So we're talking about an emerging area that is going to be seen as trying to overcome some challenges in terms of the problems that it's trying to solve, but also it also gives rise to massive opportunities. And we're starting to see that. You know, we saw it with the government when they put on the restrictions on exporting some of those waste streams, the tyres, the glass, the paper, in response to China's policy a couple of years ago. It just highlighted that, you know, we can no longer look at how we use materials without appreciating the full cost of that use. Now, where this provides a really good opportunity is in trying to solve this issue, we have the opportunity of not only creating markets, we have the opportunity of creating the innovation and technology that is going to be required to sort of solve these problems. and in doing so, attracting a whole range of new skills, maybe not so new, but expanding the skills base that have broad applicability, not only for this particular area, but right across the economy. And that probably gets a little bit back to my focus in a little bit earlier on, where I sort of was talking about, you know, some of these fundamental skills that are needed if we're truly going to embrace manufacturing in terms of this new vision for manufacturing, or what Jennifer said before, you know, just the way we've got to look at manufacturing from here on, it's advanced manufacturing. Well, yeah, but we need a whole lot of capability sets that support that. Some of those are going to be very specific and some of those are going to be very general. But where the circular economy comes into play, what's needed to solve the problems that are emerging there and get us onto this pathway are broadly beneficial to every other sector across the economy. So, you know, I think this is a massive opportunity, and there's benefits all around. You know, greater materials efficiency in the main, the skills enhancement that goes with it, just the way we think about our economic activity, what we need for that economic activity, but also how we're going to deal with some of that dynamism or that dynamic environment that's coming up. We know there's big changes coming. You know, we know we've got issues to contend with artificial intelligence, robotics, and big data and everything. Well, what does that mean in terms of how people are affected in jobs and the contribution they can make? So there's a lot of really embedded things here, a very integrated problem.
Thank you, Ross. And I think that was a great example of, I suppose, as Jennifer and others have said, you know, what are the skills we need for the next 10 years? And you can certainly see manufacturing is really well positioned to actually be perhaps the front runner, a lot of the new initiatives that are presenting themselves at the moment. So look, thank you. Again, I think the conversation could keep going and there'll be opportunity to wrap up in a wee bit, but I did just want to take the opportunity. We've had several questions raised through the registration process. Can't obviously answer them all, but I've got hopefully two that we can put to you. So Ian Cubitt, he's from Cutton Industries. I believe you had a question for the panel. Did you want to make your, oh, there you are, Ian, welcome. I'll let you ask the question and I'll leave it to the panel as to who best responds. So go for it.
No problem. Thank you very much. And just my question is, how can we better advertise our manufacturing industry to entice young Australians to enter into what can be a stable and long-term career?
Go, Innes.
Thanks, Ian. It's a really good question, and it's one that everyone, I think, is grappling with. I'd make three points just very quickly. One is that manufacturing has had for a long time what you might call an image problem, very unfairly so. But the image sort of, you know, the sawdust on the floors and all that sort of stuff, you know, which is just so far in the past, it's not funny. So this is, I think that we have a task collectively to get the image of manufacturing to reflect reality, high tech, high skilled, advanced everywhere to make that point. Second point is that we need to ensure that we have the skilled workforce that we need coming through. So that's going to mean a lot more connectivity needed between schools and industry to drive awareness around what the opportunities are in manufacturing, that they are the advanced jobs of the future. To the point Scott made earlier about the Mars landing just yesterday, that's all done off the back of manufacturing. Without manufacturing, it doesn't happen. And what goes into manufacturing is the design, the R&D, all of those elements that we talked about earlier. So we've got to get the point across that manufacturing is just more about putting slot A into part B, but it's all the other parts that go into it. And this allied point off that is that we need to do a lot more work around schools, careers counselling. That's got to be a key area. Nick Patel talked earlier about the ANZIC codes and the ANZCO codes. I think that's important. I was having a conversation with Adam Boynton, the Skills Commissioner, yesterday about the issues with the old ANZIC codes and how careers counsellors and schools just use those as reference points, and they don't get into kids that these are transcending industries and transcending industries and skills that we need. The third one is parents. Needing to talk to parents about how industry has changed, manufacturing has changed. It's an old line that I often use, but it's one I picked up from Paul O'Malley when he was CEO of BlueScope. He said when he had the girls finish their apprenticeships, they'd always be on the front page of the Illawarra Mercury, and they'd say two things. One is, I love it, and two is, Dad told me not to do it. And we have to work on parents. So I think it's an entire image building exercise, Ian, that we need for manufacturing as a whole. It's underway and it's happening, but we really need to ramp it up. That's a good point.
Excellent. I totally agree, Ines. And I certainly think now is the opportunity with our manufacturing renaissance in front of us to actually pivot that vet reputation. If we don't seize the opportunity now, then I think we can all give up the ghost. But I'm just going to throw to Scott. Did you want to add anything further on Ian's question?
Yeah, just quickly, Ian, and just to follow up Ines's comments, I think there's a couple of things I'd add. I think Jennifer's point about the challenge of the integration between vocational aid and tertiary aid is important, and breaking down that barrier in both the delivery and the systems, but equally the perceptions in terms of users. I think that's critical in terms of trying to bridge this gap and rebuilding. How do they go together? How they connect the pathways as opposed to a binary choice between the two. Rebuilding TAFE, I think, is critical to this, and the brand of that is important as well in terms of trying to change the conversation here. I think advertising is important and a forward push in that regard in terms of the points Ines has made about retelling the story. And I just add that with that, it's also the reality that these are good, secure jobs. They're not big workplaces. They're probably, the points have been made. It's more likely it's the smaller, it's the SMEs that are driving this sector and telling that story. They're in your communities. They're down the street or in your hubs. They're not, some big manufacturing plants disconnected from you. They're part of community now, and I think we can make this tangible with some, real shared vision about how we retell the story and reconnect communities to work.
Excellent. Thank you, Scott. I do like retelling the story, and lots of nodding from Ian. Ian, I'm hoping that helped answer your question a little bit more. And again, I think it's something we've all got to focus on. Thank you. Look, one last question for the audience is probably all we have time for. And I'm going to ask Layla Najahibri from Australian Fashion Council. She put a question to us, and I might ask her to play it back. So over to you, Layla.
Hi, Sharon. Thanks so much. That was an incredibly fascinating session and panel. And I'm so glad we're talking about the ecosystem and the wider, skill sets required for the manufacturing industry beyond the hard skills, as they call them. And to that point, I'll ask a question about women in the industry. So the government's apprenticeship and training subsidies have been a great support to the construction and other male-dominated industries. What is your opinion about extending the apprenticeship and traineeship model to other industries, such as the fashion and textile industry, which would not only boost participation in apprenticeships, but also increase vocational pathways for women in manufacturing?
That has to be, Jennifer has to answer that, don't you, Jennifer?
Sure, happy to. Look, I think it's a really, really good suggestion, a really good point. I think a couple of things I'd suggest is we've got to sort of start to really map out what are the skills and capabilities needed in this sector, because there is a kind of old mindset about this. And actually, if you kind of go into any value-added textile production facility, you see a very sophisticated factory floor, if I may use that expression. And I think we need to kind of recast the opportunities there. Secondly, to Ines's point, I think, we've just got to do better at the years 10, 11 and 12 in getting young people to think through a set of pathways. So Peter Shergold and I recommended that when you left school, your high school certificate, given I'm in New South Wales, was made up of three things. It was made up of your ATARs, It was made up of your work experience, and it was made up of your kind of broader competencies, your work-related competencies, and that sort of forms the basis of your skills passport. So we've got to kind of make sure that young people are then given the right info about what pathways they should get. And then, to your point, we've got to start thinking about the apprenticeship model much more broadly. And I would include in that a digital apprentice. You know, why aren't we saying, well, you know, there's a digital apprentice model? So I think your idea is a really, really important one. But again, that's about breaking up the system a bit, because, you know, it may well be that that apprenticeship in textiles and fashion is a range of micro-credentials depending on which part of the supply chain you're in. And you've got to have the flexibility to stack them up based on what the industry is actually doing. So I think it's a really good idea. It'd be a great case study for how to modernise the system as well.
A really good idea, Jennifer. Does any of the other panel members have a comment that they'd like or to share with Layla regarding her question? Ines?
I just say it's a great idea. Just to echo Jennifer, I think the success in construction has shown that it can be broadened out across the economy. And I think it's a terrific idea. The other point I'd make is that all the data we're seeing is that the fashion and textile industry is certainly on the rebound and on the way back. We're seeing that through a whole lot of collection of data, and that's in large part because it's gone through a pretty torrid time and a big dip, but it's actually moved up the value chain. And I think that through doing that has led to greater focus on skills and then a much stronger output. And that in the fashion and textile industry in many ways is an exemplar to other sectors around what can be done. But I think it's a fantastic idea, Layla.
Thank you, Ines, and thanks, Layla. And I think Australian-made textiles and clothing is certainly, I think, the most sought-after product at the moment. So thank you very much, Layla. Look, unfortunately, we don't have much time, so we're now going to move to, I suppose, the last 5 minutes of our session today. And I'd just like to thank our panel members. Clearly, securing the future of modern manufacturing is key to re-establishing more robust supply chains, and importantly, manufacturing cannot grow without a skilled workforce. If recent times have shown us anything, it is the speed with which we need to provide these skills that will ensure the flexibility and resilience of the workforce going forward. I'd now like to give each of the panel members the opportunity to provide any closing remarks. And as part of that, perhaps you might want to consider what you see as the highest priority for government or industry to boost manufacturing workforce skills in Australia. Heard a lot of suggestions today, which has been excellent. But if there was one thing that we had to do, what would it be? And if I could ask each member to keep their response to, say, a minute, that would be fantastic. I might follow the same line from this morning. So Ines, what's that one thing?
Just a quick comment. There's reason to be much more optimistic than not. I think we all should be optimistic given the time circumstances we're in and what we've seen occur over the past year. It gives us enormous reason for hope. The one thing I'd say to government, we can't be totally government reliant on this. We have to help ourselves through this in significant ways. But for the government to help find ways to drive that collaboration between industry and the training sector, so that you do get that, an example is that work integrated learning, but to drive that collaboration, either through funding models or incentives and investment. I think that is the key. That is the key area. That will develop the skills base that we need if industry and educators, in the broader sense, work more closely together and in a collaborative way. So I think that would be the one area that overall is the big challenge that we face.
Couldn't agree.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, well said, and couldn't agree more. Ross, what is that one priority to boost the manufacturing workforce here in Australia?
There's no doubt we've got to get the sector better aligned with the trainers. But that's to deal with what we're sort of supplying in terms of skills. I'd just really like to highlight here the demand side. We've got to reframe manufacturing for a 21st century. We've got to make this manufacturing seem appealing so that people want to come in and get trained to do this stuff. So, you know, I'm really excited about the prospects of manufacturing. I truly am. But we have to work across as businesses and business representatives with government to make manufacturing appealing to people as a profession.
Again, couldn't agree with you more, Ross. Certainly that reframing is needed, and I think we're all excited about the opportunities that we have in front of us. It's how do we harness those? Scott, your one thing.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. I'll be a little bit cheeky. So one thing for government, I think it's really to let industry lead and cooperate and focus their attention on facilitating and supporting that occurring, as Ines has said as well. I think for us, sort of a message to industry, I think the priority needs to be, certainly for the organisations on this call, to you know, we should record and document our consensus here and quickly communicate it to government in one voice, because I think there's an opportunity here to mobilise ourselves, and I'm eager to sort of pursue that with you all separately.
I think you got a lot of thumbs up there, Scott. So I think you might have quite a few people interested in joining that one voice. Last but not least, Jennifer, just your closing comments.
Cool.
and
So the one thing I think, in addition to the industry driving stuff, is you've got to get micro-credentialing sorted. We've got to stop talking about it and work out how to do it, and work out how to do it in a way that doesn't create inequality. We can't have the least well-off people getting a few micro-credentials and not having a portable qualification, and everyone else still having a degree and a you know, diploma. So that would be one thing that I think we've got to get right. But a broader point, just to finish on, is, to me, we've got to make manufacturing not just part of COVID recovery, but what kind of country we want to be for the next decade and beyond. And do we want to be a country that in 30 years' time we say, well, we've still got some really good banks and we've got terrific miners and all that's fantastic, but that's kind of pretty much, and a big services sector. And we have to say, what will our society be like if that's kind of where it ends up? And so, or do we want to be a society which is driven off a more dynamic economy? Because that will be a very different society, and that will be a high wage society. That will be, I think, a fairer society. So I think we've got to stop the kind of manufacturing discussion being somehow tangential to the fundamental discussion about the kind of society we want to be.
And again, a lot of nodding, Jennifer, well said. Okay, looks like we've run out of time. Just before I wrap up, it'd be great to see everyone during the session, so the panel will also know who's on the call. So if it works, could you all just change your view to gallery view? So it's this little view up in the top. If you click on gallery, you should hopefully then see a sea of faces, so you get a sense of whom you were talking to or talking with today. And I would like to use this as the opportunity to thank our distinguished panel members for their vital insights, participants for the questions, and our audience for their time and interest in working together to address future industry and workforce skills challenges for the sector. In terms of where to from here, IBSA remains committed to working with industry and governments to help act quickly in delivering modern manufacturing through a skilled workforce. We hope you found today's session valuable. The level of interest today is a clear signal that opportunities for these collegial debates and discussions with senior industry leaders are extremely valuable and becoming increasingly important. We'll be adding the insights from today's discussion, of which there was plenty, to the data that we've collected and incorporating it into a final report that will be shared with ministers and governments and industry, with Minister Cash actually asking for a meeting to discuss the outcomes of today's roundtable in the coming weeks. Certainly keen to keep these dialogues going and look forward to seeing you all again. Thank you again. Have a fantastic day.